Hastings Historical Society, Oral History of the Waterfront. Today is June 21st, 1988. I will be talking with Phyllis Whitaker Martin at her home in Irvington. Phyllis, I understand that your father was one of the people who worked at Anaconda for many years.
That's right. He worked in Anaconda from 1929 till his death in 1960.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about your father's background?
Well, Dad was born in England, and as a young man very young man, he came to Rhode Island after having had prior visits to and a prior life in Canada for a short time, and then to Rhode Island. And in Providence, Rhode Island, he had some training in a business school, and then worked for a tubular woven fabric company in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where he was treasurer, first bookkeeper, I believe, and then treasurer of the company. In 1928, I believe it was, Anaconda Wire and Cable purchased tubular woven fabric, and Dad was asked to come down to the Hastings-on-Hudson mill of Anaconda, where he became manager of the Hastings mill. He was manager of the Hastings mill from 1930 to 1936, part of the Great Depression period. And evenings at home, he would frequently get calls from people seeking employment during those troubled times. Some would even come to our house rather than phone. And when he could assist, he did. And I remember our minister also would call us about people who needed employment. And if he could direct the person to the right man down at Anaconda, he would do so. One man he helped stands out in my brother's memory. He was telling me about it recently, and I had forgotten. And this was a Russian immigrant, barely conversant in English, who went out of his way to show his appreciation. He visited my dad on several occasions during Dad's long recovery from a heart attack in 1939. He would, on each visit, bring tomatoes from his garden at the Zinser property at the foot of Edgar's Lane in Broadway. Zinser made free gardening space available for non-land owners at that time. Mm-hmm. And I, too, remember him bringing eggs. They must have had chickens. And one morning during a snowstorm, we awakened on a Sunday morning, and there was the man out there shoveling snow in our front yard for us. He was so appreciative of having gotten a job through Dad.
Yeah.
So then after that, he... during the time that he was general manager, he had to give attention to all parts of the plant. Obviously, this included an inspection of all parts of the mill, and he took a trip to all those parts once a week at least, and it was probably a good mile walking around. He talked with the foremen and workers to learn what orders were in production and what facilities were not in use and why. And then he would work to coordinate a smooth cooperation with first-hand knowledge. He was on call at all hours, sometimes on a Sunday morning or Saturday night, if there were difficult problems that needed resolving. And in 1936, Bill Whitaker was promoted to assistant general manager of all mills. There were 8 throughout the United States, from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, to Orange, California. And during the war, he assumed the job of general manager of mills. Although he was based in Hastings, his responsibilities were broader and required knowledge of the mills, and he had to travel to these other plants. But Hastings was the largest of the 8 mills that comprised Anaconda Wire and Cable. It had a rod mill. Should I tell you?
Yes, that would be interesting.
To me, it was so exciting to go down there one time with Dad. And
this is when you were a little girl?
Yeah, I was probably in junior high or high school. But the noise was tremendous. I don't know how those men... worked there, and it was so hot, I remember, and these large bars of copper were going through this process where they heated them to such a degree and then made them a little smaller and went around in a great red, fiery piece of metal. And it kept getting smaller because it would go through a certain machinery to make it smaller until it was very fine wire. And then they also had the facility for making single-strand wire into cables. And several facilities for insulating copper wire and cable with different materials. Now, my brother looked some of this material up for me, so I'm getting some help from my brother, Richard D. Whitaker.
I see.
One of Anaconda's contribution during the war, when tin was in short supply, Dick says, was a substitute coating called Anaconda lay.
Yes, that's one word.
Yes, Anaconda lay, consisting of lead with antimony and cadmium in alloying elements for easy processability. Another development during the war was extruded synthetic resins for wire insulation. Buoyant cable for the Navy, about 4 inches in diameter, was an engineering and manufacturing creation of Anaconda. This was used to produce a magnetic field in coastal waters of sufficient intensity to detonate a planted mine. There were many, many more innovations. And in I think on the pictures we're including, in July 1942, Anaconda they had a big ceremony when they received the Navy E for their work during the war. The Hudson River provided the Hastings Mill with an avenue for transportation of raw materials and finished products. And during the war, there were security towers erected along the waterfront to thwart the sabotage possibilities. But at the end of the war, the towers disappeared.
Yes.
And then also, should I tell about the Anaconda baseball team?
Oh, that would be interesting.
Dick especially wanted me to tell that. He said in a lighter vein during the late 1930s, Anaconda sponsored a baseball team managed by Jim O'Neill,
I see.
then manager of the Anaconda Employment Office. Jim had played in the majors as a shortstop for the Washington Senators. The Anaconda Arrows, later the Hastings Arrows, were tops in their league, and my dad and I, Dick says, enjoyed many a Sunday afternoon watching them in action down in Hastings.
Yeah.
Well, those are the main things that I can contribute.
Yes. And did you say that you worked at Anaconda
during the war
one summer?
yes. And my brother did too. One summer. I think most of the high school kids around here had jobs of some kind during the war.
For the war effort in some way. Yes.
I know I was in the part of the office that made out the U.S. war bonds, and we took them up to the North Mill. I remember once a week to those who worked there, and they were having them deducted from their payroll.
I see. Taken automatically from the payroll.
That's right.
Yes.
I do remember that my dad got to know all the people at the plant. He really knew them.
Was it a relatively small number of people?
I wish I knew that. I wish he were here to answer these questions.
Yes, of course.
But he took quite an interest in the families. And I remember one time we went down to the Southside Avenue?
Southside Avenue,
right
probably,
by the
near the river, yes.
And we visited some family that had a problem, some sickness and all. I remember my grandmother was with us, and she was most interested in the family.
So your dad really had a personal relationship
That's right.
with the people.
And so he worked there until he died in 1960. So.
Yes. Did you always live in Dobbs Ferry, Phyllis?
When we came from Rhode Island, yes.
Yeah.
I think we lived in 1, 2, 3, 4 different places, but it was always in Dobbs Ferry, yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we moved somewhere. So we built a house in Ballard Hill.
Yeah. Phyllis, do you know anything about the unions, about the attitude of management toward the workers, or?
I wish I could remember that. I know I read in your paper that came out about the Historic Society.
Oh, the historian, yes.
About the fact that there was a problem with the unions and management didn't want them there, wasn't that? But you know,
But you don't really
I don't
remember
anything.
that,
I can't add
no.
anything to that. I don't remember. I'm sure Dad was concerned, but what year was that? Do you remember? I don't remember when it was. I read
I
about
should
it,
know,
but-
but I'm really not sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know about that.
Yes. Do you have any special feeling of what your family felt about Anaconda?
Oh, well, that was everything to us.
Uh-huh, it was a big part of your
Yes,
life
a big
then.
part of our life, and we were very proud to be part of Anaconda.
And proud of your
Anaconda
father, yes.
family, and Dad was very excited about it, always. He was a very conscientious worker.
Yes.
And, yes, he was proud to be part of Anaconda.
Phyllis, I see a framed picture of your father with a write-up about him. Could you tell us a little about that?
Oh, in recognition of some of the men in management in the various mills throughout the country, the company put out a poster to tell about the life of these people with their picture, and the poster was then sent to the various mills and posted on a bulletin board, I suppose, for the workers to realize that many of the management people had begun as young men in the company and worked their way up and helped the company to prosper and to do well. And Dad was one of them. And I just say the last paragraph here that it says, Bill Whitaker brought to Anaconda a thorough knowledge of the wire and cable industry, the will to work, and the financial man's ability to watch and control costs, all important contributions to the company's operating efficiency. Like a good many other men of Anaconda who have brought valuable experience with them, Bill Whitaker has helped his company to grow and prosper.
Oh, yes. Phyllis, wasn't your father also connected with the Hastings Savings and Loan?
Yes, that's right. He was with the Hastings Federal Savings and Loan for 20 years, and he'd been president of it much of that time. He was also the president at one time of Hastings Dobbs Ferry Rotary Club, and when he was in Rhode Island, he had been secretary of the Pawtucket Lions Club. So he was active in community affairs
Yes.
as well as his work with Anaconda.
Yes.
He's also a trustee of the South Presbyterian Church in Irvington, in Dobbs Ferry.
Right,
Because
yes.
I live in Irvington, I'm getting mixed.
Uh-huh.
But in Dobbs Ferry
Yes,
for 2
uh-huh.
or 3 years.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much, Phyllis. You've given us information that no one else could have, and we appreciate your brother's contribution,
Yes,
too.
I'll tell Dick that you asked
Yes.
his work, his comments. After the tape was made, I had a conversation, and this is Phyllis Martin again speaking. I had a conversation with my brother, Richard Whitaker, who reminded me that the strike that Carol refers to occurred in the late 60s, and Dad would not have known anything about it because he died in April 1960. So that was all after his death, and the problems at Anaconda were following his death.
Yeah. Thank you, Phyllis.